Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar. I'm Jenny Bailey from the Agile Business Consortium. We're the not-for-profit member organisation who are leading, promoting and enabling business agility worldwide. As with all our webinars, we are recording this broadcast, so everyone who is registered will receive this in a follow-up email. My guest today is Dan North, a technology and organisational consultant helping organisations change, shape and transform. And he's also a fellow of the Agile Business Consortium, among many other attributes. So hello, Dan, are you there?
Hi, Jenny.
Hello.
Thanks for having me along this afternoon.
No problem.
Or this morning, depending where you're listening from.
Well, exactly. We do have people listening from all over the world, and that was one of the requests, in all honesty, the fact that they actually wanted our webinars not to be all scheduled in the morning. They actually wanted them to be scheduled different times of the afternoon. And so, yes, we've definitely got some people joining us from America and Australia. So it's great to have the market, as it were, and the interest in our webinars growing globally. That's fantastic. So you are talking to a lot of people currently, Dan. So it's again, thank you for your time to share with us and to share your expertise and knowledge. Now I'm trying to bring our cameras up because we're supposed to be sharing ourselves for the first time, aren't we? Which is a different experience. View who's talking. There we go. So is anyone on there? Can you see us? Is this working?
So if I start speaking, can anyone see me? Hello. This is Dan, waving from home.
Well, I'm hoping, but never mind. Okay, let's think. Let's just see if I can do this one more time. Show all webcams. There we go. We should be able to see everybody now. So, okay, that's fantastic. So, well, you're certainly a man in demand. I know you travel all over the world helping people and giving speeches. You also make organisations, well, be more efficient and also go faster, don't you, Dan? But would you say going faster is better, really?
That's an interesting place to start. Not necessarily. So what I tend to talk about really is organisational effectiveness. So if you look at what it is an organisation is trying to do, how well is it doing it, how much is value flowing through that organisation. And so faster tends to be a side effect of getting everything lined up in the way it should be.
Okay, understand. Well, this webinar is all about obviously asking you lots of questions, and it was Ask Me Anything with Dan North. So the questions have been coming in thick and fast, and we've kind of put them into different categories, really, and I think that's probably the best way of going about it. There's some questions. Well, actually, what do you think? There's some questions. What are the top hot topics, would you say, Dan, that have been coming in? Any ideas?
So what would I guess they would be? I would guess it would be around scaling, around starting, around pain points, probably something around roles. Those are the sort of things I'd be expecting to see.
Okay. Well, no, that's pretty good, actually. There's a few more questions coming in. Let's just move this on. No one wants to see me right now. Everyone wants to see you, Dan, because your bio there is extremely strong, and everyone can see for themselves that we're talking to an expert in lean and technology and agile methods. You're the originator of behavior-driven development as well, a DevOps and continuous delivery specialist. Yeah, what you were saying about scaling, that's an important one and an interesting one, because yeah, that has come up in the questions, definitely. But interestingly, so has agile procurement, Scrum, which is quite an interesting topic, and whether it's still as shiny as new. Well, obviously it's not new necessarily, but as shiny as it ever was, I guess. Pain points. People really want to know about pain points and what they can do to alleviate pain points. Agile as well, obviously, has been a very top topic. Business agility, the difference between the two, I guess, as well. Education of agile, and also estimates. There's a few questions come through about, Dan, tell us more about estimates. Now, you've been talking about estimates recently, haven't you?
the reason I'm chuckling about estimates, I got into I don't do this very often, but it seems to have happened a couple of times recently, a protracted Twitter, let's say, lively exchange of opinions.
Okay.
With various folks on Twitter about different topics. So one of them recently was the no estimates movement and the value of estimation.
Right.
And the need for estimation in large organizations.
Okay. Okay. Well, estimates is something that's close to our heart as well. Barbara Roberts, our director, actually did some work on estimates, and we've brought out the pocketbook on estimates as well. And that's been raising a lot of interest. But estimates is a bit of a funny one, isn't it? So in terms of how you do estimates and whether it works or not, I think Barbara was the first person to say the first thing about estimating is the fact that you can't do estimating practically. So it was quite an interesting presentation when she launched.
That's not a bad place to start from.
No, well, exactly. That's right. Okay, well, let's kick off, because these questions, like I said, have been coming in thick and fast. Agile procurement. Let's start there. Now, we did recently do a webinar on agile procurement with Stuart James from Agilix. He was actually the guy that we actually commissioned to actually write the Agile contract. So he was very kind to give up his time to give us a webinar on the Agile procurement and the Agile contract. But we've got a question coming in terms of, let's think, where is it? Public procurement and Agile. Any views how this can work outside tech and digital? What would you say to that?
So this is interesting. So procurement is okay, let's start with the basics. Procurement's about buying things. Mm-hmm. It's about obtaining things. Now, historically, what would happen is procurement might be going out to a friend of yours who does a particular thing and saying, can you help me do this thing? Procurement for a long time was a very closed shop. And so particularly in the public sector, we introduced a load of rules that said that procurement needs to be fair. So you need to go out to tender, you need to be able to make it so that different organizations can compete fairly with one another in order to, for a particular tender, for a particular contract. Mm-hmm. Now, let's back this up a little bit. What tends to happen particularly in the public sector, and I'm assuming public procurement means going out to the market in order to get some work done, okay, rather than necessarily in the public sector. And one of the reasons procurement as a discipline, if you like, emerged is because people generally get ripped off. Mm. Okay. Mm. So any kind of contract, my favorite definition of a contract, and there are many, but my favorite definition of a contract is it's a document that is designed to make it safe for us to do work together. Right. And I find that really insightful. So if we talk about a document where you get all of the advantage and I get none of the advantage, that's not really safe. Mm. And vice versa. Mm. So what we want is an agreement whereby we both feel confident, both feel comfortable working together. In general, there are two types of engagement model when a customer engages with a vendor. They are time and materials and fixed price. Okay. And this is for anything. So, and I see those as kind of opposite ends of a risk spectrum. So on a fixed price contract, a number of vendors, suppliers will bid different prices for effectively the same outcome or the same piece of work. And so there's a government steer that you should take the one that's best value for money. It used to be the one that's the cheapest, but then you have to factor quality in as well. So we say, which one's the best value for money? Okay. Now, once we agree that price, what that does is effectively transfers all of the risk onto the supplier. Mm-hmm. So we've got this fixed amount of money. That's not up for grabs. So now, or that's not up for debate. So now you have to be able to deliver all of the things we agreed within that fixed amount of money. The converse of that is a time and materials engagement. So now I'm going to pay you for doing work. Mm-hmm. And for as long as it takes you to do the work, I'll keep paying. Now that's the opposite model. That shifts all the risk onto me. Mm-hmm. So if it takes you ages and ages and ages, I end up paying out money. Okay, so what you end up with is perverse incentives in both directions. So with the fixed price contracts, and there are a number of large, particularly tech suppliers, but also other suppliers who are notorious for this. And I won't name names, but there's some. It's not hard to find evidence if you go onto your favorite search engine, where they will bid very low for a contract, deliberately understate what it is they are due to deliver, and then every time the customer says, "Oh, but no, we mean this thing as well," they say, "Ah, that's a change."
Right.
And so they make all their money on changes.
Okay. Right. Fair enough.
And the flip side of that is the time and materials contract. There is no incentive on the supplier to go fast, right? Because the longer I can drag this out, the more of my people and the more time I can charge for, and I make lots more money for the same outcome.
Right.
So both of these have perverse incentives in opposite directions. And I always used to think of these are the two types of contracts, and really you can see these as kind of opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of managing risk or sharing risk. So the really interesting procurement contracts are the ones where we share the risk and share the reward. So for instance, and I've been involved in these in the past, where you might say, okay, we will get in a room, the vendor and the supplier, and the vendor and the customer, and we will do some work to agree how big of a box we think it is. Roughly how many people, roughly how long, and we all agree that that's probably a reasonable guess for the size of problem we've got. And so we put a line in the sand, but it's a joint line in the sand. We both say, yes, that sounds sensible. So let's say I'm going to build something for you, and we think we can have it by the end of the year. And we both think the end of the year is probably a reasonable guess.
Okay.
And also I use the word guess because it's quite a few months, so it's always a guess, right? But your guess is as good as mine, and we think roughly end of the year is pretty good.
Okay.
If it turns out that I can bring this thing in before the end of the year and you start benefiting from it sooner,
right,
we should share that reward.
Okay.
So let's say you get to market soon and you start making money that you wouldn't have made, or it's a operational saving play and you get to start saving money you wouldn't have saved otherwise. There's now some free money you never had in your plan, and we split that money. So that means it's in my interest to deliver early because I get a share of this free money, and it's in your interest for us to deliver early because you get to market sooner.
Of course, yeah.
Now let's take it the other way. What happens if we don't get there by year end and we get into next year? Well, that really sucks.
Yeah.
And so can it suck for both of us?
Right.
So
okay. So we both feel the pain, as it were.
Yeah, exactly. I will continue working on this at maybe half rate or something, but a massively reduced rate.
Okay.
So now everyone I've got tied up in this, I could be earning a lot more with those people. We could be generating a lot more, but they're stuck on your thing. So I want to get them off there as soon as possible. You still haven't got to market, so that's annoying you. You want to get there as soon as possible. So again, we're incentivized, we're aligned in our incentives to get things completed as soon as we can. And that's one really simplistic model. There are lots of ways that you can create shared risk reward arrangements. And that means that rather than the traditional contract is adversarial, you're trying to second guess me and I'm trying to figure out how I can get more money out of you. Instead, you make it a collaborative contract and you say we're both going for the same goal. We both think it's achievable, and we will share the risk and share the reward of either under or over achieving that.
That makes sense.
So So in terms of the actual engagement model, there's a whole load of options that we've not explored, or generally we've not explored. But the bigger question is, why have all of this ceremony and shenanigans around procurement in the first place?
Right.
And the answer for that is, or one answer to that is that typically what we procure is big.
Yes.
We procure in government, we procure a hospital or a school or roads or a service to do something to do with welfare system or something like that. Typically fairly large contracts. And because those contracts are fairly large, there's a lot of risk in getting it wrong. And so we put a lot of thought and effort and governance into trying to get a decent decision.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
Which is interesting, but we could be going after something completely different. So what we're doing there is we're trying to minimize the likelihood of making a bad decision.
Yes.
Okay, by doing work. What we could do instead is try and minimize the impact of making a bad decision.
Mm-hmm.
So what if we said we are going to slice these procurement items into much smaller pieces?
Okay.
And we can do this with all kinds of government services. So if you look at how GDS, the British Government Digital Services Initiative, has been playing out over the last few years, GDS was set up in response to a number of very high-profile, really expensive, IT in government disasters. Right, so there was the NHS for IT initiative that was like £12 billion or something, and they delivered a database or something ridiculous that never worked.
Okay.
You know, and there's been many of these. It's eye-watering. And so a couple of government ministers and a wonderful lady called Martha Lane Fox, who founded lastminute.com and is a brilliant mischief maker.
Mm-hmm.
They convinced British government that the thing to do was to get a small team together, rebuilding the UK's gov.uk, the UK's government websites,
Mm-hmm.
In an agile way, primarily using open source and primarily using open data.
Mm-hmm.
And they've iteratively, over the last few years, rebuilt large parts of the UK government estate brilliantly. I mean, really, really well. And the previous incumbent was as you can imagine, a large, slow-moving consultancy type outfit that was charging eye-watering amounts of money to do this government website.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favourite data points about all of this, the initial cut of gov.uk, which is, they call it a publishing site, so it's read-only. So you can't interact with it, but you can read data off it. And that's things like, if you want to know what the VAT rates are, public holidays, all the kind of government information, that sort of stuff. So they built a website that published all of this, and they did that in 8 months with a team of about 30 people. The thing went live. It's had over 1 billion, probably over a couple of billion now, page impressions, and it's had minutes of downtime over 7 or 8 years.
Okay.
Right. It's a very resilient, very well put together piece of tech, and they built this entire gov.uk initial site for less than the procurement of the previous thing.
Wow. Wow.
They got from 0 to live for less. I know, it's eye-watering. For less money than they spent engaging with the previous incumbent.
Wow.
Right.
Goodness.
And part of the bet was, we will do this in small slices. And we will declare what those small slices are. So the first small slice will be, can you come to gov.uk and find out what the VAT rate is? Because having been 17.5% for a really long time, it changed twice in a really short, I don't know if you remember this, it changed twice in a really short amount of time.
I know it went up.
So it changed to like 15% and then it went to 20%.
That's right. Yeah.
And then it went to 17% again. It bounced around. And having never changed, and so you can imagine all of this government code with 17.5 hard-coded everywhere. Suddenly they needed to change it to 15. And so, of course, they went through and hard-coded that to 15. And then it went to 20, and they went, oh, no! And then they went and did it properly. And so now people were really confused about what the current VAT rate was. And so they said, right, we better probably get that on the website.
Oh, my goodness.
And so the initial iterations of these, and they have a very public and clearly documented set of design guidelines, a very public and clearly documented set of release guidelines. So each of these different government services, department by department, so you can renew you can pay your vehicle tax, you can apply for a driver's license, you can get a passport, all of these different transactional.
Yeah, it's fantastic. They've won awards for it, haven't they? I mean, they've really gone there.
They won awards for it. They've inspired I think the Australian government, the South Korean government. There's a bunch of different governments around the world that are looking at GDS and saying that's how you should do it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And one of their operating kind of mantras is you do things in small chunks. And so they'll say, we're going to build this thing, and then there will be an alpha release, which is, we know it's got holes. We know it's not 100% resilient yet, but we also know it's 100 times better than the last thing. So if you want to try it, that's fine. You know, we'll guarantee you won't lose any money or whatever else, but it might be a bit crashy or a bit weird.
Yeah, sure.
And so they have the alpha release. And then they'll release it as a beta. And beta means we're actually pretty confident about it. But we're still going to call it beta for a few months until we've had enough traffic and enough users to be really confident.
Sure.
And then it's live. And so they've done this with a number. So there's a number of places. I renewed my vehicle tax recently, and I went to, and again, just silly things like search engine optimization.
Mm-hmm.
So I use DuckDuckGo. I go into my search browser, and I say pay vehicle tax. I did a search on pay vehicle tax, and the top link was gov.uk DVLA pay your vehicle license tax.
Fantastic.
Because they know how to build a website.
They know what they're doing, absolutely, which is good.
They know what they're doing,
yeah.
And I click on it, and it says what's your car registration number and some other stuff, and this is a beta.
Yes.
This is a beta facility. I'm like, that's fine with me, and I was through and paid in less than 5 minutes.
Yeah, and it's good, isn't it?
The whole thing is just fantastic, and it's resilient and it's fast. So what they'll do is they'll work in small chunks, and what that means is if you're a government department. Exactly. If you're a government department paying for, if you are the DVLA, if you are the Home Office, if you are the Ministry of Justice, if you are the Department for Education, so there's a whole bunch of different government departments that are using these methods. HMRC is fantastic. So HMRC, the UK tax body, is that they are undergoing a huge transformation. And so I describe tax as a wide problem. It's not necessarily that deep. What you have is many different systems that are all largely independent.
Okay.
So things like self-assessment versus VAT versus corporate tax versus, so there's all these different systems. And all of them need effectively rewriting. All of them need complete overhaul. And so they have lots and lots of these agile teams now all over HMRC doing amazing things. But in terms of procurement then, what they've done is they said, if we only ever do small things, we can achieve big things in small pieces. But if we only ever go after small pieces, the risk of us getting it wrong is much lower, which means we can be a lot more lightweight in terms of procurement. We try something. If within a few weeks or a couple of months or whatever, we're not seeing value, we're not seeing it work, let's pause and try something else.
Well, that makes sense.
That is, so if you think of the way risk works, is you have it across 2 dimensions. You have impact and you have likelihood. So what's the chances of a bad thing happening? And if it were to happen, how bad would it be?
Okay.
So traditional, and this goes back to as well the business agility thing. Traditionally, organizations obsess about likelihood. They say we want to front load all of the planning, front load all of the analysis, front load all of the design work to minimize the likelihood we make a mistake.
Sure.
And the agile mindset is we're going to get things out quickly and get feedback, so we're going to minimize the impact of making a mistake. And that means we can kind of start playing fast and loose a bit with likelihood. We don't need to worry so much. If I have anti-locking brakes, it means that I can brake hundreds or thousands of times per second by putting my foot down hard. Then each individual bit of braking doesn't really matter, because there's so many of them and they're so near to each other. Whereas if I just have a solid locking wheel, I'd better make sure that I've got my line right as I go into that skid, otherwise we're all going to be all over the place.
Yes. So. Nice analogy there. Yeah. Okay. All right. But going back to the procurement issue, there's another one. He's asking really, is there any tips on bringing old school procurers along? I don't know if they're obviously having issues. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, so this is great. I try to speak in examples and experience rather than hypothetically, and I do have some examples of this. I have been working with some people, and they would describe themselves as old school procurers as well, so this isn't me labeling.
Okay.
Generally, I see procurement through a different lens. I see procurement as, and this is something that a good old school procurer will have. I see procurement as essentially relationship management. So a good procurement director or a good procurement lead, the thing they do, I mean, well, they have 2 superpowers. One is they care about risk. Right? One is they really understand risk, which is great because I don't need to explain risk to them. You often need to explain risk sort of from first principles. The other thing they have is good relationships with their vendors. Okay. And they spent many years building up those relationships in some cases. And both of those things are enormously valuable in agile procurement. So the conversation I have, the first thing is we're still going to have those relationships. But now what we want to do is procure smaller pieces much more frequently and with much less ceremony and much less overhead. And again, they often get that. They'll say, okay, that makes sense. Because we're procuring smaller things, we don't need so much overhead, as long as we have the option to change things as we go along.
Okay.
And so I'm very clear that they do. So they have more control by doing smaller things more frequently.
Right.
The other thing I can do is lean on those relationships. So if I say to them, right, we need to talk to our vendors, we need to start going upstream now to our supply chain and saying, we want you to engage much more iteratively, smaller batch size, so smaller chunks more frequently. And we want to be changing our minds more often, not because we're fickle and we change our minds, but because we're responsive to the market and we're getting feedback and it's making sense.
Sure.
So, and some of those vendors get it and some of them don't. And the ones that don't simply won't survive. Now, I'm typically not in a position to have those conversations because I don't know those vendors. I don't have the relationship with those vendors. Whereas those procurement directors, well, yeah, they meet with them all the time. And so now they can say, look, this is the way the wind's blowing. We are much more likely to be procuring from multiple vendors in much smaller increments, much more frequently. So we're going to need a much lighter weight governance and procurement process. We're going to probably want to automate a lot of that as well. Okay. And what really matters is rather than acting in a vendor customer relationship or a kind of supplier consumer relationship, it's much more as partners, as peers. I want you to stand beside me and we both drive this forward shoulder to shoulder rather than we set up an adversarial fixed price or time and materials type engagement. And again, some suppliers, and I've had this certainly with a couple of large retailers, where the suppliers are saying, oh, fantastic, thanks, that's brilliant. We've been doing this with some other people. We were waiting for you to come along.
Okay.
You know, and that's really exciting. And they've been waiting for us. Whereas in some cases, we say, right, we want to be doing this much more frequently and much more in a much more agile way. And they have no idea how to consume that. One example is, and again, I won't name names, but one example is a supplier of people. So an offshore testing vendor. And so what they do is they provide people to help out with testing. And we're saying, well, okay, testing is no longer a large, multi-week or month phase at the end of a delivery. Testing is now an ongoing in-team activity. So we would like to re-engage with you. We still want your testing skills, but those testers that we do engage are going to be embedded in teams. They're going to be looking a lot more at automation and thinking differently about testing. And again, some of those vendors are saying, oh, this is wonderful because we're doing this with other customers and it's great that we get the opportunity to do it with you. And let's all figure out how to do this well. And some vendors they're not even freaking out because they don't realize they don't know. They're just kind of offering the same thing again and again.
Right.
They're saying, well, no, surely you still want this because you've always wanted this. And it's like they can't make that mental shift.
Goodness.
So I think in terms of bringing the multiple procurers along, so to kind of underline the bottom line this is, as I say, it's the two things. It's I value the relationships that they've built and I value their understanding of risk.
Yes.
And so now what we're going to do is lean on that and say, let's look at risk from the impact perspective rather than the likelihood perspective, and start working in smaller chunks to minimize impact. And then that creates options, excuse me, that then creates options in terms of how we procure, who we procure with, multiple vendors, those kind of things.
Okay.
And in order to start having those conversations, I need the procurement people who spent, as I say, many years building those relationships.
Okay. All right. I think that covers procurement really nicely. So have a drink. Thank you, Dan. Let's move on to the pain points we were talking about. I know when we were talking about like there's a paradigm shift going on, which was really interesting. And we've had some questions around the pain points of transformation. What do you see as the main pain points in transformation to get organizations to move in that way? And what have you found the most common in that respect? If we can talk about that, we've had some other questions through about this as well. Well, they're talking about the best of Generation Agile and the common pain points and top tips for someone who's wanting to learn about being Agile, not necessarily doing Agile. So if we can take the first one about the transformation, and if we can look at that, that kind of the top point, if you like, of that pain point, what would you say is at the top on that list?
Oh, this is a really fun topic. So
we should have booked another one.
This could go in a number of different directions. Okay, I'll focus on what I think are the really meaty pieces.
Okay.
There's a chap called Richard Durnall, who's one of my favourite lean consultants, and he wrote a blog article years and years ago. It's no longer online. It's in the internet archive, in the web archive somewhere.
Okay.
But I lifted parts of it, and what he talks about is the various stages of things that break as you go into an organization, as you start to transform an organization. So he says, and there's six things.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
He says the first thing is the people break.
Right.
So in other words, you're going in and you're coming up with crazy ideas, and they're all running off and they go, "This is all wrong, and what are you doing?" And then the second thing is the tools break. So once you start talking about flow rather than activity, and you start talking about throughput accounting rather than cost accounting, and I'll come back to those topics in a minute, all of the tools you were using to manage work, to govern work, to track work, all of those kind of things start to break.
Right. Okay.
And that's a bit terrifying if you've built an entire career kind of driving those tools.
Yeah.
And then the third thing that breaks is the governance.
Mm.
So in other words, how do you manage risk? How do you manage investment in an agile organization?
Mm-hmm.
Then the money breaks.
Goodness.
So in other words, how you do funding.
Yeah.
Right. So how you resource projects and programs of work, how you make that accountable. Then the customer breaks. And this isn't your friendly on-site customer in an XP team or your embedded product owner in a Scrum team. This is your 50-headed different directors across a large enterprise, all screaming for different things simultaneously, right? That breaks.
Right.
And then finally, step 6 is the organization breaks and you win. And this is
like
how
you're winning anything, Dan.
the structural stuff. And what he means by breaks is that you actually reform it along different lines.
Sure.
So what I see as the real challenges are, and you and I talked about this before, is this idea of what's called a paradigm shift. So your paradigm is the way you see the world. It's your model of how things are and how things should be.
Mm-hmm.
So a paradigm shift, it's a term from behavioral psychology, and it means a reset in how you understand the world. And paradigm shifts generally are really, really difficult and abrupt and unpleasant, and because you thought you knew how things worked, and you suddenly discovered you didn't. In The Matrix, if you've seen The Matrix, where he wakes up and he's a battery and a whole cell of other batteries. So if I just spoiled The Matrix for someone, I do apologize. That's a paradigm shift. He thought he was living in this world, and now he suddenly realizes that whole thing's a projection and he's living in a different world.
Yes.
So he suddenly and very uncomfortably discovers that things aren't what he thought they were.
Mm-hmm.
So the paradigm shift in business agility is that for 50, 60, probably longer years, we've been using a model called cost accounting in the West. And cost accounting is completely understandable where it came from. The idea was that you have an organization, and once an organization gets beyond a certain size, you can't know everything that's going on.
Mm.
This is pre-computers. Once you've got a few thousand people, you cannot know what's going on in engineering, in marketing, in manufacturing, in supply, in sales, in operations. There's just too many moving parts.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so what you tend to have is heads of each of those areas. And you say, okay, Jenny, you're my head of engineering. We see engineering as a cost center. So the different divisions in the organization are either cost centers or profit centers.
Okay.
And the idea with cost accounting is that you drive up the revenue in profit centers and you drive down the cost in cost centers, and that's good governance.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And that's fractal. So the head of engineering, Jenny, my head of engineering, my VP of engineering or whatever, says to her engineering leads, you all need to drive down costs, and they say to their engineering managers, you all need to drive down costs, and they say to their team leads, and so on.
Yeah.
And so everyone has their own budget thing that they have to kind of try and work within.
Mm-hmm.
And on the sales side, it's, you need to have sales targets and sales revenues and all of those things.
Mm.
And if we can save enough money in the cost centers and make enough money in the revenue centers and the profit centers, then we're successful. That all looks great on paper.
Mm. And
that's mostly how we do management. Now, the problem with that is it's a completely broken model.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Ellie Goldratt in the 80s wrote a wonderful book called The Goal, and he proposes a model called throughput accounting.
Okay.
And he says there's no cost centers or profit centers. That's a what's called a reductionist view of an organization. It's breaking it into small pieces and then having an opinion about those pieces, rather than connecting all those pieces together and saying all of these pieces together generate value.
Mm-hmm.
So he sees all activities in a business as value generating. There's no cost and profit centers. Everything's value generating. The fact that the salesperson takes money doesn't make them a profit center any more than the fact that smoke comes out of an exhaust pipe, out of a tailpipe, makes the tailpipe the generator of that smoke.
Yeah, sure.
And the smoke is coming from elsewhere in the engine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's just where the smoke happens to emerge. The salesperson is just where the money happens to come in. So that money is being paid for value, for a service or for a product.
Mm-hmm.
That product was designed, that product was manufactured, that product was marketed, that product in order to generate that money. So what you do instead of looking up and down your org chart is you look across the organization at what are called value streams.
Okay.
And so a value stream is any sequence of activity that starts with some inventory and ends up with some profit, some revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the paradigm shift: is to get away from the cost accounting, profit and cost center model, and start thinking of everything as revenue generating. Everything as value creating, and to look at what are called the value streams. And when you connect them all together, the value chains of streams that go across an organization to build products, to build services, to get those to customers and to meet customer needs. And look at everything in your organization that is blocking that flow from happening.
Right. Okay.
So where you have people context switching. So for instance, in a traditional, I'll give you some real examples. In a traditional organization, I may have, so Jenny's one of my best analysts. So I've got her working on 4 different projects. Okay. What that means in reality, if you're any one of those projects, is 3/4 of the time, Jenny isn't here. Right? That's the reality for any one of those projects.
Sure.
And so now if I'm a piece of work in one of those projects trying to get done, 3/4 of the time, I can't possibly be being done because Jenny's in a different meeting.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Sure.
Add to that the context switching, add to that the fact that you need to, as you move from project to project, re-engage, get back up to speed, see what's happened since the last time you were there, etc.
Yeah.
What you have is lots of work stuck in the process.
Sure.
And so lean metrics look at things like work in process, how much work is trying to get through the system and is stuck. Lead time, which is how long in terms of elapsed time, like wall clock time, from someone saying, yes, we're going to do this, through to someone saying, thank you for doing it. So that's lead time. It's like from commitment to thank you.
Okay.
And those sorts of metrics rather than activity metrics. Now, where it gets really broken is it's not just that going after activity and effort metrics is looking in the wrong place. It's actively harmful, it turns out. So the busier you get people, the longer it takes for any work item to get through the process, because people have big queues of work and people are context switching all the time.
And the less
and
they
so
do.
you end up with, and I'm working, well, the less they can do.
Yeah.
Because they're context switching, they're being pulled into meetings. And of course, as soon as work gets below a certain threshold of speed, then we start having meetings saying, why aren't things going faster? And we start doing remedial stuff, which makes things even slower.
Sure.
It's like being in a traffic jam and then saying, right, we're just going to stop all the traffic in this traffic jam while we discuss why the cars are going slow. Let's take all the drivers out of the cars and we'll talk about why the cars aren't moving.
I love that analogy. That's brilliant.
And, and when you say it out loud, it sounds bonkers.
Oh,
this is what we do.
Completely bonkers. Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
And so now,
and then you step in. Is that right?
Well, this is Dan and Jenny on a chatting away. Imagine this is now Dan and a a room full of execs who've built 20, 30, 40-year careers on the other model.
Sure, absolutely.
Right? This is an enormous threat. Okay, so if I say to the salesperson, you are not a profit center, you know, the entire system of work you've built up with all of your salespeople, unless that's aligned to delivery, unless that's aligned to fulfillment, unless that's aligned to supply, unless that's aligned to product development, unless that's aligned to engineering and manufacturing, then you don't have a product. That's quite a threatening thing to say, or that can be perceived as quite a threatening thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so a lot of the challenges are about making it safe for some of those people, particularly senior people, to hear that paradigm shift, for guiding them through it, showing them a way to navigate that, and showing the organization a way to figure out how to, and again, so I think in terms of systems. So I'm a systems thinker. So one thing that I've been teaching myself for quite a few years, and I'm still really rubbish at it, but I still try and do it, is whenever you see someone in a situation who's struggling at work, right, they're underperforming or whatever, then you don't think of it as Jenny is underperforming. Right, that's the obvious thing. Jenny's underperforming. Let's interview Jenny. Let's put her on a remedial program. Let's whatever it is, you know, personal PPPs or PIPs or whatever, some random TLA that says we're going to make Jenny better. I'm going to assume that Jenny's smart. We hired her for a reason, you know, and she's a perfectly capable adult. And we have created a system of work which presents as Jenny can't do stuff. So in other words, the fact that you're struggling, or the fact that someone is struggling, is a failure in the system of work, not a failure in the person.
It's a whole other way of looking at it, isn't it?
It's a whole other way of looking at it. Now that's easy. That's a management problem now, because management is managing the system of work. That's on me. I need to come up with a better system of work that means that Jenny can get stuff done. Because whatever I'm doing now is systematically stopping Jenny from making progress.
Yeah.
And again, I've got thick black smoke coming out of my exhaust pipe now, and I'm blaming the exhaust pipe. Right? The chances are the problem lies elsewhere. And if I go and clean out the engine, there won't be thick black smoke coming out the tailpipe. But if I go and blame the tailpipe, guess what? Nothing happens.
You're full of analogies. Another great analogy, Dan.
So thank you. So this is what I try and do, is I try and get particularly people in a management context in organizations, and in the large organizations, you've got a lot of those people, to reimagine, if you like, or re-engage with their role. Their role is not managing people. So most people see a manager as somewhere between like a policeman and your mum. Have you tidied your room, and I'm going to be checking on you. And you know, whereas in a lean organization, you have managers. So it's a bit of a fallacy that lean organizations don't have managers. Lean organizations have managers, but the manager's role is to manage the system of work, not to manage people. So if I'm a manager, my job is to create an environment in which that value stream can flow as effectively as it possibly can.
Okay.
And if the mantra is you measure the work items, not the workers.
Definitely.
So if I'm seeing work items getting stuck, I need to figure out, or work with the people nearest the work to figure out how to unstick that work. If I see people who are underutilized, I don't care. Right? Ooh. Right? Because my goal is not utilization.
Right.
My goal is flow.
Yeah.
So if Jenny has a bit of downtime, she's a smart individual. She'll go and learn something, or she'll go and inject herself into something else and see if she can help, or she'll look at the work coming down the pipe and she'll say, what do we need to do to get ready for that work?
Sure.
Okay, so that's slack time. Or she might just pause and take a rest, right, because she's been working really hard. Now, all of that is fine.
Yes.
Because none of that is stopping work flowing, and all of that is lining us up so that when the work does hit, it'll flow faster.
Right. It's almost like we were saying before, there's so much going on that people are almost blinkered to continue doing what they've been doing for such a long time, and semi-fearful, I guess, of changing in any way, but wanting to continue. And then they do that even faster, don't they, Dan? Because they think that's the only solution they've got to do is carry on and put more speed into what they're doing. But like we were saying, fundamentally, what they were doing is quite wrong, isn't it?
Absolutely. So one of my clients, a big American bank a few years ago, the lead there of a 500-person IT division in the middle of the bank. And these guys are responsible for some fairly serious banking operations. They had something like $1 trillion a day of value of trades flowing through their business, hundreds of millions of trades a day. I don't know how many milliseconds of downtime that is before someone notices, but it's not many, right? So very critical bank systems. And there were lots and lots and lots of these things, because the way you become a big bank is you bang together lots of little banks.
Sure.
And you absorb all of their legacy systems over, literally decades. So there was a really complicated technology stack there, really complicated business processes, and as I say, highly critical to the bank's operations. And he set down the challenge to his 500 people. He said, we are going to halve lead time. We're going to double throughput inside a year with no loss of quality.
Gosh. Okay.
And he said to me, afterwards, I actually don't care what the results are. I don't care if they halve lead time. He said, some of those teams are going to find it trivially easy to halve that lead time. Some of them, all of the lead time is out of their hands. They can't do anything with it. He says, what I care about is 500 people are now obsessing about lead time. And they were kind of, what's lead time? How do we measure that? What's that? And within a year, they had halved their lead time.
Wow.
And doubled their throughput, and were working shorter hours to do it, because they understood that what they were trying to do was flow work, not do work. Yeah.
Sure. Yep. Different perspective. Yep.
Different perspective. And then the following year, because they were getting the hang of it by now, they halved lead time again and doubled throughput again. So in other words, in 2 years, a group of 500 people were producing 4 times what they had 2 years before, just by thinking about things differently.
Wow. That's incredible.
And in each place, it's great fun. It's great, and there's a bunch of stories like that. But what we didn't do was tell them how. We didn't say this is how you'll do it, because each team is different, each product is different, each context is different. We said, go after this. We will support you in any way we can.
Okay.
Every time something blocks you that you can't unblock, make some noise, and we'll come along and we'll try and help. And every time someone got blocked, they would say, I'm stuck, help, I'm stuck, and we'd go and try and help. And sometimes we could, and sometimes we couldn't. But at the end of that, as I say, a year in, we had largely, and I remember when we were first pitching this idea to some of the teams, one of the senior developers said, what do you mean halve lead time and double throughput? So I can't possibly work any more hours. I haven't, I'm working weekends, I'm working nights, I'm not seeing my kids. And I said, well, right now that stops.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No more.
If I hear that you've worked late or you've not seen your kids over a weekend again, I'm going to be furious. And he was like, so we're going to work shorter hours and we're going to double throughput. I said, yes, that's what we're going after. And it wouldn't fit in his head, because his paradigm was so locked into in order for things to go faster, I have to work harder.
Yeah. It's a strange shift for some people, but everybody needs to be on board with it as well, don't they?
Yes.
No, that's interesting. So that's the main pain point then in transformation, and when you set out, which is definitely one of the questions that, well, a lot of the topics actually that were being put forward. So we're up to 50 minutes already, which is incredible, and we've kind of covered about 2.5 of the topics. I think maybe we should have an Ask Me Anything with Dan North part 2. What do you think?
I'll be happy to come back.
Well, we've got. I'm just thinking. Well, there's education in Agile, there's business agility, there's Agile and adapting in Agile, and then also we've got like these technical questions that have been coming through. And incidentally, Dan, I think you'd like to know that people are thinking you're an amazing speaker and they're listening intently. I'm getting messages coming through from lots of people saying it's just incredible listening to Dan, and what he's saying is just so valuable to us, and we're learning lots. So again, thank you very much for your time this afternoon, definitely.
All right, well, thanks for the opportunity.
What would you say about this one? Why is the prevalent attitude of managers features equals pounds, and that maintenance and ops plus equal waste? What would you say to that one? Yeah,
this is interesting. So, and this isn't my quote. I can't remember whose this is. Otherwise, I like to cite my sources. But it was someone saying that there was a meme going around a few years ago now. They're saying that testing is waste. In lean terms, testing is waste because it's non-value adding activity.
Right.
Any non-value adding activities are waste. And he said, okay, I've got these 2 identical cars here. One of them I've tested the brakes and one of them I haven't.
Okay.
Would you pay more for the one where I tested the brakes?
Oh my goodness.
well, probably yes. I think I would. Right?
Yeah, definitely.
He said rat testing is a value-adding activity. So, depending on who I'm speaking to, I have a number of different answers to this. If I'm speaking to a product person,
right,
and again, so the product owner, this is very clear. The product owner is a specific role in Scrum. It's not an agile thing; it's a Scrum thing.
mm-hmm.
And 25 years ago, when Scrum started, it was a very, very important role. It meant it was the role where you've just brought together a bunch of people who've never worked together before.
Mm-hmm.
You've pulled them all out of their silos as analyst and programmer and tester and architect,
mm-hmm.
and various other things. In large organizations, those silos tend to be very low trust. You know, they all think that they're the only people holding the place together and everyone else are idiots.
Yeah, sure.
Because you tend to get tribalism in silos.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so the product owner role was about coaching that team to think in terms of product.
Mm-hmm.
So as a programmer, I defined myself as, well, I was writing code in the 90s, and I would think, you know what, my job is to convert detailed functional specification into code. That's what I do. I take a functional spec and I code it up.
Uh-huh.
As a tester, my job is to follow a test plan and execute tests and submit bug reports. Okay, and so on. As an analyst, my job is to write down requirements in a way that idiot programmers can't get them wrong,
mm-hmm.
etc.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And no one was thinking, I am building a product to meet a customer need. And so the product owner role was that coaching role. So whatever your particular discipline might be, we're all building a product here. And This is what the product needs to do.
Okay.
And that was a really important capability because now you're teaching these people to think in terms of product.
Mm-hmm.
Over the years, it's become perverted into the thing that it is now, which is essentially someone who manages a backlog and tells a delivery team what to do.
Okay.
It's an order giver,
mm-hmm.
and then the team become order takers. And the unit of currency is the feature. So if I'm talking to product people, I'll take them back to those early days and say, right, your role isn't to tell the team what to do. Your role is to that lovely Antoine de Saint-Exupéry quote where he says, if you want people to build a ship, don't tell them about logs and laden weights. Teach them to long for the sea in their hair and the wind in their hair.
The emotion of it, almost, yeah, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the feeling of it. And as a product owner, your role is to get the team so excited about meeting that customer need that the team can say, this is what we need to build next. Clearly, we all agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of practical examples, I'll talk about there's two that I talk about. One is the Nokia, the N95 versus the iPhone. So the Nokia N95 had a feature set as long as your arm. It did everything. It was state of the art. It was all singing, all dancing. The iPhone, when it was published, when it was first released, I think 2007, was rubbish. It wasn't even 3G when all of the other phones were 3G.
Yep.
If you sent a text, you couldn't copy the text. You couldn't copy the text from your SMS into something else. It didn't have copy and paste.
Well, wasn't it meant for games rather than phone or something at that time, wasn't it? Wasn't the requirements for it?
Well, it was meant to change people's relationship with their phone.
Yep. Okay.
That's what it was meant for. And, it didn't come with the user guide because it was obvious. You swiped and you pinched and you tapped and you whatever else. If you'd gone out to the market and said, what do you want, customers? No one would have said, I want a phone with no buttons.
No, fair enough.
And no one would have said, I want a phone. That 3G? Yeah, forget about that. I don't want that. Right? Yeah. No one would have said those things. And history prevails. The N95 sunk in the water. The iPhone, Nokia is nowhere in phones anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And because they obsessed about the feature set, not about the user experience.
Okay.
And so what tends to happen is, and the other example I give is Microsoft Word versus Google Docs. So Microsoft Word, gigabytes of stuff on my hard drive, all singing, all dancing. No one since 1998 has done a mail merge, right? Right. There are features in Word that people will never ever use again. So Google Docs does hardly anything. It does a tiny, tiny fraction of what Word does.
Sure.
But it does it brilliantly. It does it in my browser. It does it on any device. And guess what? I just use that for writing documents.
Mm-hmm.
So the feature set is one aspect of a product, but typically not a very interesting one.
Right.
It's the needs that it meets and the experience that the user has interacting with it
Okay.
are much more valuable. Now, when your unit of value, and again, let's take this back to the 90s,
mm-hmm.
when all these agile methods started,
mm-hmm.
We would build a product, and by the time that product hits users, by the time the product was released, might be months or even years down the line, certainly months down the line. And so any impact I could measure would be distant in time and space from where I did the work.
Right.
And so I can't really measure value, so I have to just measure cost and things like that. So that's when I drive down on cost.
Right.
And I measure throughput in terms of features. Whereas now, if you look at the technology we have now, the tools we have now, cloud computing, all of these amazing facilities, I can spin up a product in a morning, put it in front, A/B test it in front of 2% of my 100 million users, and have robust data feedback by lunchtime.
Incredible.
That's completely doable, right? And so the using features as a proxy for value is redundant now. We can use value, right? We can go straight to customers and measure it.
Sure.
And for instance, then if the team is thinking about the product rather than just one person, the product owner or the product manager is thinking, or the customer is thinking about product, depending on your flavor of agile methods, then the team can have a much more holistic view. So the team might say, well, actually, in terms of user experience, what we really need right now is resilience. We need to really lean on making it available. Well, that's an engineering thing. We need to lean on making it faster, more responsive. Well, that's an engineering thing. We need to lean on making it work on more devices. Well, that's an engineering thing. These aren't features necessarily. These are capabilities, and those capabilities come from the engineering team as much as they come from the product management side.
Sure, absolutely, incredible.
So that's what I tend to ask people is what experience do you want your users to have? Do you want your customers to have? What need are you meeting? And how quickly and effectively could you, plural, you the whole team, meet that need? How quickly could we get something we could test to see whether it's meeting that need? And that's often not about features. That's about some much more holistic thing.
Okay. So that attitude then, why is it prevalent attitude that managers features pound signs and the maintenance and ops equals waste? That where do you see that? Does that feature?
Very much so, and that's a vestigial, that's a hangover from the first generation agile methods, particularly Scrum, because once you get that certification pyramid scheme going, right, where certified trainers, certified Scrum masters, and product owners on a 2-day residential course that basically teaches you whatever you can learn on a 2-day residential course, and once that becomes a prerequisite for recruitment and for people trying to navigate the early part of their careers in the agile world, you've created a self-sustaining monster that is now locked in a time bubble 25 years ago.
We were talking about this, weren't we? About Scrum and what's next for Scrum, and is it still the bright shiny thing, and moving on from Scrum, really, like you're saying.
Well, and this is the thing. If you look at the values underlying Scrum, and the values underlying Scrum come straight from the new product development game. So this is things like lean operations and flow and lead time. And if you project those into your modern constraints, what we're looking at now in the 2010s, heading towards the 2020s, the practices, the things you would measure are very different. Like we had to measure features because lead time was a pipe dream.
Yes.
It was too complicated to measure lead time. Well, now it's not. Now we can measure, we can go straight to the source.
Yes.
We can measure work in progress. We can make work in process visible. We can go after flow. We can, as Don Reinertsen says, we can measure the work item rather than the workers. So we can use all those lean metrics at first hand. We don't need to use second order proxy metrics. We can measure value. We can measure business impact by looking at actual business indicators. We make this change. Does it reduce customer churn? We make this change. Does it increase conversion? We make this change. Does it and so we've got genuine hypotheses. We can try and falsify it. We can take them out and test them, and we can do that in days or weeks.
Incredible.
So, but what's happened is the incumbent thinking is all about features and whatever else. Actually, I have a talk online, and I can find it afterwards, and we can put it up there as a resource called Beyond Features.
Okay.
That explores this, and it says, well, if we can get beyond this obsession with features and start instead thinking about meeting needs and solving problems and doing the kind of things that technology should be doing, then we are much more likely to be doing the kind of work that we should be doing rather than the kind of work that we thought we should be doing 25 years ago. And again, it's there in the very first line of the Agile Manifesto, which I still think is a tremendously powerful and valid document.
Yeah.
It says, we are continuing to learn new ways, right? We're continuing to uncover new ways.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so 25 years on, guess what? We've continued to uncover new ways. But we're saying, but those aren't in the syllabus for this 2-day class, you see, which is kind of locked in stone. Oh, okay, then. Well, then, even though we're continuing to discover new ways, you better get on and do that other thing over there, which is slightly frustrating when you meet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no,
so I try and guide people away from that and suggest that they try something else.
Okay. Well, look, if you can give me the link for Beyond Features, that would be great. And then what I can do is I can include it in the follow-up email that's going out. Now, the other thing we were going to talk about, but we've probably run out of time, Dan, so I do apologise to everybody listening, but we're over the hour now. But what I'd love to suggest is, Dan, come back to us for a part 2 sometime in the year. That would be fabulous. Would you be happy to do that? And I'm sorry to put you on the spot as well, but we just had so much to talk about later in the year. We don't need to do it next week, I promise. But I
feel like we just got started. So
exactly.
let's circle around later in the year and see where we're at.
Exactly. And also later in the year, you're going to be joining us at the Agile Business Conference, aren't you, in September, which will be fantastic. That's happening on the 27th of September. Can you just give us a little brief of what you're going to be discussing with us at the conference so people can kind of gauge when they're going to come along and see you, really? It's your new comp paper, isn't it, that we were talking about the other day? Do you want to say anything about that? Or should we just include it in the follow-up email?
So we'll send out a link with the email. But
brilliant. Okay.
I coined a new acronym, which is swarming.
I think it's great.
So SWARM is scaling without a religious methodology.
Yes.
And what happens is organizations, in the same way that organizations who want to start delivering differently at team scale, they go out and they buy themselves some Scrum or some whatever else, and they set off down that journey. Organizations that want to start transforming into a genuine business agility, genuine front to back flow, there is a certain type of C-suite exec who wants to go out and buy a solution. And they'll go out and buy a package solution, and there's a number of package solutions out there. And what I was arguing in this paper or in this article is that those methods, they might be a useful template, they might be a useful starting point, but they are not the solution. So what I argue in this paper, Scaling Without a Religious Methodology, is that there are a number of factors or characteristics to take into account. And if we focus on those, things like leadership, things like investment, things like giving yourselves enough time to learn, some fairly obvious things, but they seem to get sidelined, then you're much more likely to be successful over the long term in terms of transforming the organization. So I've written this as an article. It's on my website, dannorth.net/blog. Again, we can send out a link with that.
Of course, yeah, that would be great.
But I'll be talking about that and hopefully getting a kind of Q&A going as well at the Agile Business Conference.
No, that would be fantastic. And thank you for including that as well. Also, I mean, you write your perspective of how you write. We were discussing this as well. It's like you're both from both camps, aren't you? You're very much from the IT camp and also the business behavior and the culture camp as well. So you really seamlessly bring those two together, which I think is really important.
Well, thank you. I try to. I mean, I still cut code. I'm still a 25, 27-year programmer. Something. Well, professionally, I started programming in the mid-80s.
Sure.
Oh, goodness. So, and I'm still programming. still looking at distributed architecture, still looking at, so I still have very strong technical view on things and technical involvement in things. And one of the things we were talking about earlier is the idea that I may get called into an organization on some technical basis. Can you come and help us review the system or understand why it's not working so well? And it may well be an organizational or a people issue that's presenting as a technical problem.
Yes, sure.
And so we can fix the technical problem, but guess what? It'll come back in another form. Or we can look at the underlying organizational challenges that led to this technical thing emerging. So one of the things I like to do when I'm consulting is be able to move between those different perspectives, because often, again, the smoke's coming out the exhaust pipe, but that's not necessarily the place where the interesting stuff's happening.
No, fair enough, and that's such an awesome analogy. I'm going to take that away. We had Steve Morledge on the other day from Beyond Budgeting, and he gave a great analogy about Beyond Budgeting being like a racehorse at a racetrack. You wouldn't bet on a donkey necessarily. You'd want to bet on a thoroughbred, and you'd want to see that it has 4 legs. So we're good with analogies on here. We really are. You'll have to tune into that one to know what we're going on about.
No, Bjarne Bogsnes is one of my heroes. He's such a brilliant guy. He has another great analogy for Beyond Budgeting, for throughput accounting. He says that the traditional budget cycle, where you have your annual budget cycle, he says it's like going to a bank that's only open for 1 week a year. And you just think, that is insane. Crazy. Why would you run a business like that?
It is insane. It is insane. There's a lot of things that are still going on that are completely insane, aren't there? And we seem to be uncovering them bit by bit and trying to help them as we go along. But we're going to have to stop, Dan, unfortunately. It's like 8 minutes past the hour. And it's been an utter delight talking to you. It really has. But yeah, we've mentioned obviously that you're going to be at the conference, and thank you so much for joining us again at the conference. You add such a huge experience and knowledge to the scene there. We really, really value you coming along, which is great. We're going to have to see what we can get you doing as well, whether you can do a round table and a presentation, but we're planning that at the moment, as you know, so we can talk to you about that. Those links would be fantastic for the Beyond features, and also in praise of swarming links. If you can send those through, I'll make sure that everybody gets those links going out on the follow-up email with the recording of this presentation. So I've had a few questions coming through. Are we recording, and do we get this recording? Because it's fabulous. But yes, we do get this recording. I will send it through to you within the week, hopefully, as soon as we've got everything to put forward there for the webinar follow-up email. We will look at doing this again. I think it's been a huge success. People have joined us from all over the world, Dan, which is just fantastic. And again, thank you very, very much for your time, your expertise. I'm sorry we haven't got round to all the questions. There was obviously too many questions and far too many topics for us. We did have an agenda, but time definitely has run away with us here. So apologies for that. And Dan, I'll put some more questions to you. And if you'd like to answer them in your own style, in your own way, and come back to us, then you're more than welcome to do that. I do honestly like to keep discussions open after our webinars, and you've given your details as well, which is fantastic. So we really appreciate that. So let's just move on quickly, if I may, to the next webinar that we've got hitting our screens, if I can. There we go. That was us having things. Right, the next one then is on 11 o'clock on Thursday, the 10th of May, where I'll be joined by Adina Tarry, and it's all about developing an adaptive self fit for a digital age. Now, Adina is an incredible lady. Yeah, that's such a deep topic, isn't it? It really is a deep topic.
Right, I love that topic, yeah.
Well, I'll have to introduce you to Adina. She's actually going to be at the conference also, Dan, and I'm sure you guys would just hit it off. She's an AI strategist, a coach, a business psychologist, and also an accomplished author. She works as an organization consultant, combines business savvy, science and technology across cross-cultural competence and psychology. So she's one to know, and I will definitely introduce you, Dan, no problem at all. And I'll introduce whoever is listening, coming along to the conference, and if they'd like to be introduced to her, then please send me an email at jenny@agilebusiness.org, and I'll make a point of introducing you. That would be wonderful. But that's going to be our next webinar, 11 o'clock on Thursday, the 10th of May at 2018, Developing an Adaptive Self Fit for the Digital Age. yeah, that just brings up so many questions to me. It really does. And fear in
Yeah.
a way, because like we were talking the other day, the digital age, it's here, it's all happening. The AI is here, it's all happening. Robotics is coming in at an astounding rate. And how are we going to make ourselves adaptive and fit for this? So it's a huge question, isn't it?
I love it. I love it. It's a great topic.
Brilliant. All right, but for me, for now, Jenny Bailey, and for Dan
I'm
North,
already thinking of like a dozen different questions. Sorry, I'm interrupting you. Carry on.
No, that's okay. That's okay. We'll send them through. If you've got questions, then we can put Dan North's questions to Adina Tarry, and I can introduce you online. That would be fine. I don't mind that at all. But again, thank you so much for everybody taking the time of your busy day, morning, afternoon, evening, for joining us. Much, much appreciated. Dan, thank you again for your time. We really, really appreciate you being there. But for now, for everybody, goodbye, and we'll speak to you all again very soon. Bye-bye.